Hey guys, in today's video, we'll go over how to install insulation in between the panels in our Flex series. The insulation comes in a large roll like this one. We quote the insulation to run horizontally in between the Flex studs and stack on top of each other. We'll go over how to measure for the insulation later on in this video. To cut the insulation, we use an insulation saw. I'll put a link in the description for this exact saw. However, you can use a sharp knife or scissors to cut the insulation. To measure for the width of the insulation, the measuring points will be the same as the measuring points we use for the width of a solid panel. We'll measure from this point on the Flex stud over to the same point on the opposite side Flex stud. This measurement will allow the insulation to fit within the open cavity of the Flex stud. The width of the insulation should be the same from top to bottom. Therefore, we can cut one piece of insulation to the width we need and use it as a template for the other pieces. To cut the insulation, mark the insulation with the width measurement taken. I like to put a couple marks on the insulation to try to cut as straight as possible. If the cut is not straight, that's not a big deal because the insulation is going to be in between the panels. With one piece of insulation cut, I can then use it as a template to cut the other pieces I need. Before installing the insulation, make sure there's flex trim installed on the opposite side of the wall to hold this panel in place. Now this could be full height pieces of trim or just trim tags. We just don't want this panel flexing while we're putting the insulation in. I went ahead and installed one piece of insulation. As you can see, the insulation is pressure fitted in between the Flex studs. If you happen to cut the insulation short, that's not a big deal. You can use a spray adhesive or tape to hold the insulation in place until the panel is installed. Another important thing to note is to make sure the insulation stays off the shelf of the Flex stud where the panel will sit. This will help when you're installing the Flex trim to hold the panel in place. So I'll go ahead and install the remaining pieces of insulation. At the top of the wall, we'll need to rip a piece of insulation to fit up into the ceiling track. All you'll need to do is take a height measurement to make sure it fits into that track, or if you had to go into a Flex stud. With the insulation installed, we can now install the panel on this side of the opening. The installation situation used here was for a full height panel. The same installation concept will be used for any location where you have solid panels. You just need to make sure that that open cavity is filled with the insulation. This will conclude the video on how to install insulation. If you have any questions, please contact our office.